Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
Hello, I'm Jim Holcomb, President and CEO of the Michigan Chamber and today's podcast host. We're going to be talking about the American spirit today and how parts of our history get passed down through the generations. Our very special guest today is Greg McNeilly, the CEO and President of the Windquest Group, also a longtime friend of the Michigan Chamber. And now, in addition to his day job leading a portfolio of businesses, Greg is a well-known thought leader in public policy and political circles. And now he's added being an author to that impressive resume. He's published a new book called Red, White, and Verse. It's a wonderful read. It's about key U.S. historical moments and our heroic figures. Greg, thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Now, before we get to Red, White, and Verse, if you could just give listeners a little bit of background on you and the Windquest Group.
Sure. First, the Windquest Group. So we're a Grand Rapids-based family-owned holding group. We've sort of a diverse portfolio with companies in B2B medical supply and equipment, home closet and organization, consumer beverages, restaurant and hospitality, peak performance services. We're a small but tight portfolio. We have operations and assets in about 28 states.
Oh, wow.
with a base of about 1,700 employees across the portfolio that we serve. And Jim, you and I have known each other for almost 30 years.
We're getting old.
Yeah. Way back in our days in the Michigan legislature, and some of your audience probably know me more from politics, but about a decade and a half ago, our ownership group, the Betsy and Dick DeVos family, asked me to consider leaving politics and joining them in business. And I remember the conversation as if it were yesterday. I said, look, I don't know anything about business. And their response was, the nomenclature is different, but campaign management is very much like a startup. Your business is only existing for up to 24 months. You have operations, revenue issues, product development, marketing, and your market share is a little bit tougher in a campaign if you don't have 50 plus 1%. Whereas in business, you would kill for 30% of a market share, right? Like it's a different environment. The nomenclature and the pace is different. So anyways, no decisions irreversible, made the jump, and never looked back.
Well, that's great. As president of the Michigan Chamber, I can only say thank you for all the work you do, being a job creator and being a strong advocate within the business community, and your thought leadership. You've always been a balanced person, and what I appreciate about you is you take a long-term view of an issue, and you're looking for a solution. You aren't looking, far too often today, it's about a quick hit. It's about, did I get a tweet? Did I get a like? Did somebody build my social media brand? And you're long-term, you're good for Michigan, and we appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. And I also, there's a tie to why I love the Windquest Group. The first company they invested in 34 years ago was still in the portfolio. We're not just flipping companies. We're looking at the long term, even in our businesses, which I think is the responsible approach to business, and certainly the responsible approach to public policy. Oh,
absolutely. And you talk about long term, and that seems to be how your book, if we look at that, you recently released your first book, as we said, Red, White, and Verse, and it's very popular, I might add, on back quarter. It took me a little bit to get, so congratulations on a wonderful launch. But it's a book about poetry and quintessential American moments, heroes, and so much more. I'm interested. It's from Ben Franklin and Daniel Boone to the Statue of Liberty, business leaders like Henry Ford. And so it's a really eclectic cross-section of historical people and events. And I'm wondering, what inspired you not only to write the book, but to do it in verse, to do it in a poetry format?
Great question. So the book was assembled or collected sort of with my kids in mind. I've got young kids, 4, 6, and 7.5, and I worry about the content that's available to them about our country. And I grew up in an age and generation and very fortunate to have a household that really pushed me to believe in our country and to love our country, to always question it, not to be a sycophant, right? Like, to question and challenge, but to try to live up to our founding ideals. And I want the same for our kids. Now, I've always dabbled with poetry since high school, and poetry is one of those things that you can kind of pick up and do in your notebook or in an app on the go. And so it's always sort of been with me. And one of the poems, I was really struggling with what to rhyme Bin Laden with, the poem about 9/11. I was in a speakeasy in Wichita, Kansas, meeting a business associate who ended up running 45 minutes late. And maybe with the help of a beverage or two, I finally solved that problem sitting at the table.
Creative juices get flowing.
Exactly. And then somebody showed up, turned back to business, and I could put that in my pocket. I don't think I could do that start-stop cadence with prose or, long essay type of things. But anyways, the book was put together to kind of tell the American story, warts and all, for the next generation and for my kids specifically.
Yeah, well, just first off, it would be another podcast, but how you wrote a book with 4, 6, and 7.5-year-old kids, I'm not quite sure. But that's a wonderful testament to your dedication to it. But as you kind of looked at the book and what you were trying to do and the theme came through, was it one thing that drove you to write the book? Did you look at a person or an incident or an event? Or was it, hey, I really want to tell this story and how am I going to weave it together?
Great question. So the very first poem, not in the book, the book's poems are put together chronologically by historical timeline. Mm-hmm. The very first one I wrote about 8 years ago was about Sandra Day O'Connor, Trailblazer for Justice. And the reason, and this will obviously belie a worldview perspective that I have, mm-hmm. but the reason why I wrote about Sandra Day O'Connor was I watched Ruth Bader Ginsburg be sort of lionized in the popular culture as this amazing trailblazer and somebody who shattered a glass ceiling at the Supreme Court. And I was like, wait a minute, there was another one. There was a first. And it wasn't RBG. And nothing to take away from mm-hmm. her. I think her story is amazing.
Yep.
And her legendary friendship with Scalia, there's so many wonderful qualities about her, but why was one forgotten? And so anyways, that sort of got my juices flowing. Always loved poetry. Always liked the more heroic ballad, great man and woman theory of history as a way to understand history. And so that was the impetus, sort of a reactionary statement against pop culture at the time.
How long did it take you to write the book from start to finish? And did you start out saying, I'm going to write this book and put it together? Or were you writing your poetry and then it evolved into a book when you started to have a collection?
It was the latter. It took about 7 years for all the poems, and then about a year to kind of collect them, put historic notes with them, and get through a publishing process. And so the poems were, it was probably 3 or 4 years after the Sandra Day O'Connor one. I just started doing it on the side. Then I had the idea of, hey, these really are for my kids, or these could be something that they might appreciate. And that made me a little bit more earnest, a little bit more disciplined about producing them. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, there's actually something here maybe to share with a broader audience, which, by the way, is a very daunting process. I used a online tool to submit to agents and publishing houses and got well over 3,000 rejections. Mm-hmm. I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice every single one of those. Yeah. But that's part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways.
Well, it only takes one. It just takes somebody to see the value in it. And I think we see from the sales of the book, and like I said, it was hard to get, that it's going to take off, and it already has as you put it forward. And that's a good thing.
Yes, it's all part of the journey. And that's part of the country's journey is about failure, about missteps, but it's about, more importantly, correcting or learning from those and growing. And that's why I think it's so great I think our superpower as a country is how we're always getting better. And we don't get it right the first time a lot of times, right? But we're obsessed with improvement and progress. And that's so special about this country.
And I think it's great that you note that in your collection and in your poetry. And it's not just, I'm a patriotic person, I love themes of patriotism, and there's some of that in this book. But like you said, you tackle the warts and all. And I think that's important. As you said, we're always striving to do better. We're striving to evolve as people, as a country, as businesses. And you're showing that that really is part of the American spirit.
Absolutely. Look, all of us make mistakes every day, and we want to be treated with grace and not be known for whatever our worst mistake is. And we need to have the same grace regarding our history and realize that there were great people in the past who had big flaws, and but they still helped build something amazing, and we're all benefactors of that, right? Like, we have a very special country that we're able to live and try to reach our individual fulfillment and thrive as people, unique in the time span of our species. And unique on this planet. And so it's something to celebrate. But yeah, we can't ignore the warts, and we learn from them because we don't want to repeat them.
Yep. No, whether you're in business and government, running your family, being a person, we all learn from doing better. I think one of the areas I really enjoyed about the book is you have accompanying historical facts before your verses. And I'll admit that in my past, I've not been a big reader of poetry, and often it's because I struggled with symbolism. And I wasn't exactly sure what was being conveyed, or was I having the right interpretation. But I found your book, part of it was so enjoyable because I'm a factual person. There was facts and material beforehand, and then you read the poetry, and it just connected, and it gave me almost like a mind's eye view. I was having a visual representation in my mind as I read the words. And I thought that was just one of the best parts of this book. It made it understandable and relatable for everyone.
Well, that is great to hear, Jim. That was the goal. It was great to hear that feedback. And again, with producing it in with children in mind, that's what led me to that sort of composition, putting together some explanations. Not that it's children-only material, because it does tackle complex topics, but the goal is to kind of educate. Obviously with a point of view and a perspective, but start with the basis of fact, and then, add then the perspective, which I think, I grew up in an era when news was news and opinion was on the opinion page.
Yep.
And the two could go together. And I still think that's a great way to, learn a topic, then have a point of view. And that's just kind of a great way to process things.
Yeah, I think we see that in all forms of society now. It's really opinion without information, and that's what's leading to so much of the divisive nature of our society. And I think social media lends itself to that a little bit, because you can quickly react and you can put something out there, and we're shouting people down, and we're getting more and more people are disengaging because they don't want to lean in and have the fight. And I think you're right. It's about we want, especially our children. I'm so happy that you wrote it for kids. We need our kids to be more informed and to form their opinions based upon their experiences. And, we need to communicate the historical past of our wonderful country to help them be fully informed.
Agreed. I couldn't agree more. And we need them to grow up with an appreciation and love of country so that they'll fight for her. Like, I mean, we, hopefully that's not against external threats or internal threats, but to fight for a better version of our country every single day. But we know, given the history of the world, that we are likely to experience strong opposition and people who look at us with jealousy and try to take our prosperity, or to threaten us, or to hurt other countries where, we want to step in and defend American values abroad. And that may require sacrifice, and it's hard for a generation to do that if they don't have some common beliefs and faith in our country.
Yeah. I was interested in the book. I think it was in the introductory notes. You say poetry is best consumed when it's read out loud. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. Why is that easier to digest poetry if it's, spoken verbally?
Sure, and I appreciate the question, because I probably should have been more precise in that lyrical poetry, because not all poetry has to have a meter to it, is especially more powerful when heard aloud, because that you don't read music the same way you listen to music. And it's one of the reasons poetry and my past life in politics marry up, because my early part of my career was speech writing, and good speeches have a cadence or meter to them that obviously doesn't have a rhyming scheme per se, but has a meter and an undulation and tones that connect and make the spoken word even more powerful than the written word. And I don't know the neuroscience behind why that's true, but when things are set in a cadence or meter, whether it be music or poetry, it has a more powerful impact. It lasts longer. It connects more strongly. And that's one of the reasons why my preference is for some form of lyrical verse, although I appreciate, all forms and the tough choices any poet has to make in scripting verse, even if it's non-lyrical.
No, I appreciate that because I was thinking about my own personal experiences, and you're exactly right. I'm a audio learner. I learn much better if somebody's speaking to me and I'm just listening to it. When I read, I try to memorize. It's kind of from my law background. I'm trying to remember facts and figures and be able to regurgitate things back to people. But when I listen and I hear something, it does seem to stick with me a little better and resonate. So that makes sense. You've referenced your kids and you wrote this with them in mind. How have they received it? Do they have, or does your family have a favorite poem? And what's been their reaction to their dad being an author?
They asked me if to the last part, they asked me if I am now famous. And I said, well, I don't think so, maybe infamous, but, there are ages where, there's some complex concepts that, like time even, that they're still struggling with. But it's kind of almost become a family. It's a little kiddish in the family. Like, they'll be like, Dad, do you have a poem on this? Depending on the topic. Or I'd be like, guess what? I have a poem on this. Right now, the favorite of the older two is probably Davy Crockett poem, just because they enjoyed watching the old Disney classics, and then the song that goes with it.
Sure.
So there's a line in one of the stanzas where I give the ode to King of the Wild Frontier, and so they that just connects with them, and they can visualize it, and it's a part of America's story that they're familiar with. But yeah, it'll be interesting over time. Like they understand now the Statue of Liberty, and I read them that poem a couple of weeks ago, and they had a lot more questions. They wanted to see pictures of it again, and every time I go to New York for work, they ask me to take a picture of it. Because those who flown into LaGuardia, you're often in that flight path. So, it just creates a point of conversation.
Yep, that's interesting. You say that the Statue of Liberty is my favorite one. That just hit me from being a kid to now. That to me embodied the American spirit. That embodied what it means to be an immigrant in the country and to come together and to be the melting pot. And it really was the American spirit, in my mind, is embodied with the Statue of Liberty. So that one I did really appreciate it. As I read it, I thought back to my time as a child, and the first time I saw it, I spent July 4th on a boat right around the Statue of Liberty one time with fireworks, and it's a really amazing part of our history that I think not enough people know about. What?
Totally agree. In that visual that you just painted, like I totally see you on that boat with those fireworks, and what a special moment.
Oh yeah. What do you hope that your readers take away when they close the book for the final time and they're reflecting? And for me, it's going to be a book that I don't read and close. I have it in my office, and I'm about halfway through all your poems. But I go back and I read one, and there's been a couple I've read, like the Statue of Liberty one. I enjoyed it so much, I've read it a few times, and I think it's going to be a book that I constantly use almost to inspire me again, to talk about the wonders of America and the American spirit, and really to almost be something that motivates me when society seems to get us down.
Well, Jim, thank you for sharing that perspective. Your experience with it was exactly what I hoped it might have some impact on a reader. I've joked with some that I call it could be considered a toilet book, meaning you put it in the bathroom because you can't speed read poems, and they are bite-sized devotionals in a way. And so just to take one and savor it, work on it, figure out what you like and don't like. I've had two different readers give me similar feedback that feels like to some audiences it might be hitting the mark, which is one person said it gave them a renewed sense of patriotism. They always loved our country, but it just sort of quickened their spirit. Another older lady who had lost a brother in a foreign conflict. And one of the poems brought her to tears thinking about his sacrifice. And she really appreciated it. And, that whole range of the idea of helping bring back that love of country in a hopeful way. Because I think we are moving through some challenging times, and hope is a powerful, powerful emotion. And the opposite is also powerful, despair. If we lose hope, then a vicious cycle starts to turn and occur, which can be very damaging. And a lot of countries around the globe during their histories have lost hope, and it's been the end of them as being stable environments. And so, preventing despair from setting in would be awesome.
Yeah, and there's so many, the countries you talk about, and even in America, what we see, there are so many people that thrive on driving despair because they get empowered by it. So the more that they can shut down everybody's free thinking, their energies, their creativity, and their hope for the future, just empowers a smaller and smaller group of people who try to take advantage, which is unfortunate. We're coming to the end, Greg, but combining your roles and experiences as a business leader, a political leader, and I kind of want to tap into your elements of being thought leadership. And, you're a new author. When we're talking about the American experience and we're embracing it in our founding principles, and we're in an election year, and I'm not asking you to talk about the election per se, but what would you say the state of our country is right now as we think about the American experience?
I think it's challenged, and certainly in my lifetime, I believe the most challenged, because I do believe that a growing number of people have lost hope in our country. And I don't think I've ever witnessed that in my lifetime. And so I'm concerned about how challenged we are as a country. But I also watch the number of people that are still trying to get to this country to make a better life for themselves. And I know that to the world, we still stand for that hope and opportunity that is unique in our small little space on this globe. We are the unique opportunity for hope for people to flourish and pass on to that next generation a better world. And that's a reminder that, not all is lost, not even nearly all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we need to fight back against that despair. But I think we need to be honest. There is challenge. And in recognizing that there is challenge, let's all recommit to trying to find hope or spread hope or fight despair and find that commonality. We don't have to agree, but if we have that shared value of how we want to make our country better, we can find common cause.
No, I completely agree. We're only going to lose when we all stop trying. And, I think your book is providing that hope to people. I think the more that people read it, it's going to be an inspiration to many, and it's going to light that little fire in somebody's mind where they consider not only what has happened in the past, but how do they contribute to the rich tapestry of the American spirit. So can you tell our listeners, where can they get your book?
Sure. Red, White, and Verse can be found on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com, Target, almost any online retailer of books, or on my personal website, McNeilly.com.
Great. Well, Greg, time always goes too fast. I've so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for what you're doing in the business community, but thank you for writing this book, because I think it really will have an impact on many people.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks to the Michigan Chamber.
Well, tune in to our next episode. Subscribe and like to our podcast for easy notifications. And until next time, do give some thought to how you can add to the American spirit.